Just keep being you. Yeah. Just keep being you.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 1 of the Gentlewoman Boss podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Horlbogen. I thought before we started with a guest, I should do a show with a little bit about my background and how this work of love came about. So I'm a born and raised New England girl. Yes, I am a proud Patriots and Tom Brady fan. As a matter of fact, I have quite a few things in common with Mr. Brady. My grandparents were Johnsons, as were his, and both of our grandparents had dairy farms. My grandparents had a farm in Dudley, Massachusetts, and I grew up pretty much running wild on the farm. We had horses, cows, goats, sheep, dogs, cats, a huge garden. I mean, it was an amazing part of my childhood with great memories. When I was about 5, my parents divorced and both went on to remarry, which meant I learned very early on how to navigate and survive in the world of step families, step parents, step siblings, step everything. And one thing I learned very early on was to be a peacemaker, to keep a low profile, to keep my mouth shut, and that worked most of the time until it didn't. And those times it didn't work were usually when my sense of justice had been challenged to a point that I could not keep quiet. And it usually involves some level of bullying or just outright unfairness that I couldn't tolerate. And yes, on those times that I did push back, I usually got my butt whooped because all the heat that was on the person I was trying to defend and protect ended up being turned on me. But that was fine because I learned early on to pick my battles wisely, to know when to put my toes on that line in the sand, either for myself or someone else, and when not to. I definitely preferred to keep the peace, but I always rooted for the underdog and was willing to risk my own personal comfort zone for them when duty called. I also knew that I had the advantage of being a girl, and there was minimal chance that one of the big guys was going to clobber me, and that the last thing they wanted was to get hit, outsmarted, or shown up by a girl. And I admit I definitely used that to my advantage. And I was known on occasion to swing at them, but only if their friends were around to eyewitness it, because I knew the damage of public shame would far outweigh any pain that my measly punch would cause them. And not much has changed today. 40 plus years later, I'm still a peacemaker. I would still prefer not to engage. To be honest, back then I was terrified to confront the bullies. I was terrified to engage. I mean, I was tiny. I'm only 5'1" now. That's my maximum adult height. But in time, when they saw whatever change happened to me, whether my eyes glazed over or I looked a little taller, I don't know what happened. But when they saw me take that posture, when I had enough, they just started to back off. They knew I was going all in, and they did not want to engage. So I guess you could say I do have a history of dealing with bullies, which I think, unfortunately, may be true for many of us. It's also why some 40 plus years later, I cannot look the other way when I see someone bullying someone, or I see someone being treated unfairly, and especially as adults in the workplace. Now, some of you know, I personally experienced this in the workplace. I was fired 2 days after voicing ethical concerns that I had to my superiors. And although for quite some time I had been dealing with multiple bullying personalities at work, from passive-aggressive to covert and overt narcissists to just plain old two-faced hypocrites, I was still caught off guard by that ultimate act of betrayal from my bullies collectively. With all of my experience dealing with bullies in my life, I was still caught off by that knife in my back. And I don't ever, ever, ever want anyone to feel as helpless or betrayed or as humiliated as I felt, not just that day when I got the phone call that I was fired, but in the weeks and months that followed. So as I slowly regained some sense of balance after that blow, I knew I had to shift gears. That's the only way out of that victim mindset, because you do feel like a victim, and it goes from target to victim very quickly, and it's a horrible place to be and a feeling to have. So to get out of that victim mindset, I knew I had to find a way to turn my loss and my pain into a way to help others. So I shared my story on LinkedIn about getting fired. I wrote a long post. I cried while I was writing it. I was terrified to open the app back up to see the responses, but I had the most tremendous response from people. And I just want to say, if you're one of the ones that reached out to me, whether it was through a public comment or the hundreds of direct messages I got, I just want to say thank you for validating me, for supporting me, for sharing your story. You have no idea how much that meant, that support. Because I felt very vulnerable. I felt very vulnerable. But at the same time, when you're in that state, you don't really feel like you have anything else you can lose by being honest. So I just want to thank all of you. You were amazing. So anyway, the stories started flooding in. People started sharing their workplace experiences, workplace culture, issues with their bosses, boards that weren't doing their job. So many stories started coming in. My network began to grow, ridiculously grow. And everything, it was literally a turning point in such a beautiful direction for me. I realized two things. First, that I wasn't alone, that this sadly, but truly happens all the time. Secondly, that the reality that this conversation has to be had, and that I realized I could use my experience to start that difficult dialogue in some way with every person I met that I came across that I could talk to about addressing this issue in the workplace. So to help people, and women especially, to know it was okay to talk about it and to tell their story about being bullied by other women. So yes, I do have a very personal investment in this podcast and the subject of bullying women in the workplace. This topic deserves a seat at the table right beside the Me Too movement, as much amazing progress has been made with that. To call male perpetrators to account, there has been very little done to hold women accountable for workplace bullying and harassment. And I think that's the next step the platform has to go, or at least the conversation has to go. And thank you again for both men and women, but particularly the men that have reached out to me asking if I would address the topic. I will. I intend to, from your perspective as well. So just bear with me and I will get to your story. So anyway, on January 7th, 2020, I launched the Gentlewoman Boss website. And on February 11th, 2020, this podcast went live. So I have some amazing guests lined up for the show, people who will empower you to take action in your life so you can prepare, protect, and defend yourself. They will inspire you to not give up, to not let the bullies in your life win. So please hit the follow button or subscribe button. I just got an email that I'm on iTunes now, so you can find me if you're an Apple person. And that's also where you can leave your review at Apple Music. I'll put the link in the episode description so you can leave a review if you care to. You can also email me at michelle@thegentlewomanboss.com, and you can follow me on social media at gentlewomanboss, where you can also direct message me your questions, your thoughts, ideas, concerns. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you soon for episode 2 of the Gentlewoman Boss podcast.
Just keep being you. Yeah.